You've felt this before. You just didn't have the words for it. That quiet moment when everything around you goes still, and instead of peace, you feel something else. A strange emptiness, like something is missing, but you don't know what. You try to ignore it. You scroll, you talk, you distract yourself, but it keeps coming back, because deep down, there's a question you've been avoiding. What if nothing existed? Not just no people, not just no problems, but nothing at all. No world, no time, no space, no you. And here's the uncomfortable part. A small part of you doesn't just fear that idea, it's drawn to it. Because if nothing existed, there would be no pain, no expectations, no pressure to become someone you're not sure you even want to be. But then something inside you resists. Because if nothing existed, then you wouldn't exist either. And suddenly, that quiet thought becomes something much heavier. Not just a question about the universe, but a question about you. Why are you here? Why does anything exist at all? This is the question that once haunted one of the most brilliant minds in history, not in a dramatic, existential crisis kind of way, but in a quiet, almost unsettling curiosity. A question so simple, it almost feels childish. And yet, the deeper you look at it, the more it starts to unravel everything you thought you understood. Because your mind isn't built to handle nothing. Every thought you have, every feeling, every memory, all of it depends on something existing. Even your imagination needs a foundation, a shape, a concept, a reference. Try to imagine absolute nothingness, not darkness, because darkness is still something. Not silence, because silence is still an experience. Not empty space, because space is still a thing. Real nothingness has no properties, no edges, no time, no awareness. And here's where it gets strange. The moment you try to imagine it, you fail. Your brain replaces nothing with something else. Because, psychologically, you're not designed to comprehend absence at that level. And that limitation reveals something important about you. You don't just exist in reality, you depend on it to define yourself, without something to compare yourself to. Who are you? Without time passing, what does your life even mean? Without existence, there is no story. And yet, despite all of this, the question remains, why is there something instead of nothing? You might think this is just a philosophical curiosity, something abstract and distant from your everyday life. But if you look closely, this question is already shaping how you think, how you feel, and how you live. Because at its core, this isn't just about the universe. It's about meaning. You spend your life trying to make sense of things, trying to find purpose, trying to feel like your existence matters. But what if existence itself doesn't come with a built-in meaning? What if it just is? That thought can feel unsettling, almost threatening, because if there's no predetermined meaning, then you're left with something most people try to avoid: responsibility, not in the heavy, burdensome sense, but in a quieter, more personal way. You are responsible for the meaning you create, and that realization can go one of two ways. It can feel freeing, or it can feel terrifying, because if nothing had to exist, then everything that does exist is almost accidental, including you, and your mind doesn't like that. It wants structure, it wants certainty, it wants a reason that feels solid, so it creates stories. Stories about purpose, about destiny, about why things happen the way they do. And those stories help you function. But underneath them, there's still that quiet question. What if none of this had to be here? Now here's where it becomes deeply personal. Think about the moments when you feel lost, when you question your direction, when you feel like you're drifting without clarity. In those moments, you're not just struggling with decisions, you're brushing up against the same uncertainty that exists at the core of reality itself, a kind of groundlessness, and instead of recognizing it, you often try to escape it. You look for answers outside yourself, you compare your life to others, you chase goals that promise a sense of certainty, but even when you reach them, the feeling doesn't fully disappear, because the question isn't really about what you achieve. it's about why anything exists at all. And here's the paradox. The more you try to find a final, definitive answer, the more it slips away. Not because the answer isn't there, but because the question itself might not work the way you think it does. You're asking why, as if there must be a reason. But what if existence isn't based on reason? What if it doesn't need justification? This is where your mind starts to resist. Because if existence doesn't need a reason, then neither does your presence within it. And that challenges something very deep inside you. The belief that your worth has to be earned, that your life has to be justified, that you need to prove you deserve to be here. But what if you don't? What if existence is not something that needs to be explained, but something that simply is? This is where the question shifts. From why does anything exist to something much more intimate. What does it mean that I exist, despite the possibility of nothing? And suddenly, the conversation is no longer abstract. It's about you, your awareness, your experiences, your ability to feel, think, question. Because here's something most people don't realize. The fact that you can even ask this question is already extraordinary. Out of all the possible states of nothing, there is this, a reality where you are conscious, where you can reflect, where you can wonder. And instead of seeing that as something obvious, you've become used to it. You've normalized something that is, in many ways, incomprehensible, because you wake up every day and assume existence as a given. But it's not. It's something that, by all logic, didn't have to happen. And yet, here you are. Now pause for a moment, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. Let yourself feel that. You exist, not as an abstract idea, but as a living, aware presence. And for a brief second, something shifts. Because instead of asking why everything exists, you begin to notice that it exists. And that subtle shift changes everything, because the question is no longer something you're trying to solve. It becomes something you're experiencing. But here's where it gets even deeper. If nothingness is truly the absence of everything, then it doesn't have rules. It doesn't have constraints. So why isn't there nothing? Why is there something instead? Some thinkers have suggested something unsettling, that maybe nothing is actually unstable, that maybe existence is the default, not because it was chosen, but because it can't not be. And if that's true, then the existence of the universe isn't a miracle, it's inevitable. But that leads to an even more uncomfortable realization. If existence is inevitable, then so is everything that comes with it, including uncertainty, including struggle, including you questioning your place in it. And suddenly, your confusion about life doesn't feel like a personal failure anymore. It feels like a natural consequence of being conscious in a reality that doesn't come with clear instructions. But instead of accepting that, you often turn that confusion inward. You think something is wrong with you, that you're behind, that you should have things figured out by now. But maybe the problem isn't that you don't have the answers. Maybe it's that you're expecting life to provide answers it was never designed to give. And this is where the question about nothingness quietly transforms into something else. Not, why does nothing exist, but why do I expect certainty in a reality that may not offer it? Sit with that for a moment, because if you remove that expectation, something interesting happens. The pressure begins to fade. Not completely, but enough to notice. Because you're no longer trying to solve existence like a puzzle. You're allowing yourself to experience it, without demanding that it explain itself. And that shift is subtle but powerful. But it also brings you to the edge of something uncomfortable. If life doesn't come with built-in meaning, if existence doesn't need a reason, then what guides you? What tells you what matters? What tells you who you should be? This is the moment most people turn away, because it feels like standing in an open space, with no clear direction. And yet, there's also something quietly liberating about it, because for the first time, you're not being told what your life is supposed to mean. You're left with something much more personal, the opportunity to decide. But before that realization fully settles in, there's one more layer you need to see. Because even though the idea of nothing seems empty, it reveals something unexpected about your mind, something you've been carrying for a long time, without realizing it. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And that's exactly where we're going next. Because what you've been calling nothing isn't actually the most unsettling part of this question. The real discomfort begins when you realize something else. You don't just fear nothingness, you fear meaninglessness. And those two things are not the same. Nothingness is the absence of existence, but meaninglessness can exist within existence. You can be surrounded by people, activity, noise, and still feel like none of it means anything. You've probably felt that before. Moments where everything looks normal on the outside, but inside, something feels disconnected, like you're going through the motions, but not really in it. And that feeling is much closer to your everyday experience than the idea of nothingness, because it shows up quietly, in your routines, in your thoughts late at night, in the way you question whether what you're doing actually matters. And instead of facing it directly, you often try to fill it with distractions, with goals, with constant movement. But filling it isn't the same as understanding it, because the discomfort isn't coming from a lack of activity. It's coming from a deeper place, a place that's asking a question you've been avoiding. If nothing had to exist, then what makes this moment meaningful? And that question doesn't have a simple answer, because meaning isn't something you discover like an object. It's something you create through attention, through intention, through awareness. But here's where most people get stuck. They wait for meaning to feel obvious. They expect it to arrive fully formed, clear and undeniable. And when it doesn't, they assume something is missing. Something is wrong. But what if meaning was never supposed to feel permanent? What if it's something that shifts, something that evolves, something you participate in rather than receive? That idea can feel unstable at first, because it means there's no fixed anchor, no final point where everything suddenly makes perfect sense. But it also means something else. You're not locked into a predefined path. You're not trapped in a story that was written without you. You're part of the process, and that changes the way you see your own life. Because instead of asking, "What is the meaning of my life?" you begin to ask, "What feels meaningful to me right now?" And that question is much more honest, much more immediate, much more human, because it doesn't require you to solve existence. It only asks you to pay attention to your experience, to notice what resonates, what matters, what feels real. And slowly, something begins to shift. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, but in small, quiet moments. Moments where you feel present, where you feel connected, where you're not trying to escape your experience. And those moments are where meaning starts to take shape. Not as a grand answer, but as something lived, something felt, something created through the way you engage with the world. And here's the part that often goes unnoticed. The more you try to force meaning, the more it slips away, but the more you allow yourself to be present, the more it naturally emerges. Because meaning isn't something separate from your life. It's something that exists within it, in your relationships, in your thoughts, in the way you respond to what happens around you, even in your struggles, especially in your struggles. Because when you face something difficult, you're given a choice to turn away or to engage with it. And in that choice, meaning is created, not because the struggle itself is meaningful, but because of how you meet it. And suddenly, the question of nothingness starts to feel different, not as something to fear, but as something that highlights the value of what does exist. Because if nothing had to be here, then everything that is here becomes more noticeable, more vivid, more real, including you, your thoughts, your experiences, your ability to question all of this in the first place. And instead of seeing your existence as something that needs to be justified, you begin to see it as something that can be experienced fully, honestly. without the constant pressure to figure it all out, because maybe you were never meant to have all the answers. Maybe the uncertainty you feel is not a flaw, but a natural part of being aware. And instead of trying to eliminate that uncertainty, you can learn to move with it, to live alongside it, to let it exist without letting it define you. And that doesn't mean giving up on meaning. It means redefining it, not as something fixed and external, but as something fluid and personal, something that grows with you, something that reflects the way you choose to engage with your life. And when you begin to see it that way, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop waiting. You stop searching for a final answer that will make everything clear, and instead, you start participating in your own experience, more intentionally, more consciously, more honestly. And in that shift, a quiet kind of clarity begins to form. Not the kind that removes all questions, but the kind that makes those questions feel less threatening, because they're no longer something you need to solve. They're something you're allowed to explore. And that changes your relationship with yourself. Because instead of seeing your confusion as weakness, you begin to see it as curiosity. Instead of seeing your uncertainty as failure, you begin to see it as openness. And suddenly, the question that once felt overwhelming, what if nothing existed, becomes something else entirely, a reminder. That existence is not something you have to earn. It's something you're already part of. And within that existence, you have the ability to shape your experience. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter, enough to feel, enough to create moments that are real to you. And maybe that's where the answer was hiding all along. Not in some distant explanation of why the universe exists, but in the simple, undeniable fact that you do, right here, right now, aware, questioning, alive. And instead of asking whether existence has meaning, you begin to realize something quieter, but far more grounding. Meaning isn't something you find at the end of the journey. It's something you create every time you choose to be present in it. So the next time that quiet feeling returns, that sense of emptiness, that lingering question, don't rush to escape it. Don't try to silence it. Just sit with it for a moment and ask yourself something different. Not, why does anything exist? But, what do I want to do with the fact that it does?